Working in layers, okay, so this is a really important aspect of using Photoshop. If you're going to put multiple things into one picture, you're going to work in layers. So I'm going to combine a couple of different images together to make a finished image. So I want my background first, so I'm going to go to File, Open. I'm going to open the city background that I've used so far. I also want to put a few things here, so I'm going to turn this into a bit of a space picture. So I want a background that is an image of space. So I'm just going to go to File, Open, Picture of Space, open that up. I've got a really big space image. A few more things that I'm going to add to it. I'm also going to add a UFO in the foreground. So we're going to have a couple of different layers. So these are my three pictures. My city, my background, and a UFO I'm going to stick into the foreground. Now, I need to make sure that this blue background is going to be the space background. So I need to, over here, first of all, get rid of the lock. And I need to get this picture into this one. I've got to put it in there. Again, click the lock, go to the arrow tool. So if you're ever going to move something, click the arrow tool and you get the little boxes at the side so you can move it around. You need to click this so you're able to drag it and you're going to drag it up. Keep watching the arrow, keep watching the arrow, drag it up to that one. I've still not let go. I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to let go. It's completely covered the city. This is because of what's happening over here, this bottom right corner. This is my layers over here. I've got two at the moment. I've got layer 1 and layer 0. Layer 0 is the city. Layer 1 is the space sky. If I wanted to make the space be below the city, I'd have to grab the layer and drag it down so it's below it. If the space is above it, it shows up first. So in front is at top, behind is below. So I want it to be below the city. I want it to be behind it so that I can see the buildings in front. However, I've got this blue background in the way, so I need to get rid of that. I'm going to use the magic wand tool because as you've seen before, that works really quickly for this one. So I'm going to select the background. Oh, what's happened here? I've selected the wrong layer. Now, this is a mistake you are going to make time and time again. I make it all the time when I'm making work on Photoshop. Whilst I can see the city, I've still got this layer selected. So if I was to press delete now, what I've done is deleted the space layer. I'm going to make the top layer invisible, clicking the eyeball. I've deleted bits of space. So I've made a mistake, so I'm going to press Control Z. And I want to get rid of all the marching ants. So I press Control D. Control Z undoes, Control D deselects marching ants. If you ever want to see what your other layers look like, you can just press the little eyeball button and it makes them invisible or visible. Now making sure I'm on the right layer, I'm clicking on the top layer. I'm going to select the blue background and press delete or backspace, delete or backspace, delete or backspace. Get rid of the marching ants, Control D. Now I've got the space coming through the back of the picture, okay? Perfectly fine. You could have anything in the foreground. You could have a picture of a person and have aliens behind them. You could have the sea behind them and a picture of fish in front. You can do any combination, but you've got to make sure that your layers are in the right order. If there are certain buildings I wanted to delete here as well, I could do that by using one of the other tools. So I could use the polygonal tool, which is the straight edge tool, and I could cut this building out like this so that it is no longer in the foreground. I've made sure that I'm on the right layer as well. Double click to finish it off. Press delete and it's gone. So you can cut bits and pieces out as you go along, but I'm fine with this. However, I want another layer just to up the complexity of the image. So I've got this UFO. I'm going to stick the UFO in front of the city. So I'm going to press the lock again. I'm going to go to the move tool, the arrow tool up here. So I can move it around. I'm going to drag it all the way over. Drag it down, still holding the click, let go. This image is absolutely massive though. So I'm going to zoom out So if you want to zoom out, you can hold Alt and move your mouse wheel in and out. Otherwise, you can click the little magnifying glass down here, and you can either have minus at the top left up here, minus, or plus to zoom out. So if I click with the minus one, it zooms out. Over to the arrow tool. This image is absolutely huge, so I'm going to shrink it, drag it in. Got the tick and the circle with a line through it. I'm going to press the tick, so I want it to stay there. Zoom back in. Now I need to start cutting. This time I'm going to use the quick selection tool. I'm just going to draw over the UFO nice and carefully. Zoom in a little bit so I can see a bit more detail. Ooh, I've selected too much. The reason for that is because the grey of the spaceship here and the grey of the background is very close. So what I'm going to do is hold Alt. So I've got the minus symbol in the circle. You can see it change from a cross to a minus. And then I'm going to draw into the background. It's going to minus these bits. And now I'm going to get really close so that I can just make sure I don't make that same mistake again. Slowly, 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 and it shouldn't do too much. Zoom out, do the bottom bit of the spaceship. If I've selected the spaceship now, so if I was to press delete, I'm going to delete the bit I want to keep, which is an issue. Press Ctrl Z. I want to make sure that I've selected the outside of this picture. I don't want the inside selected. I wanted the outside. I want to get rid of this grey background. So what you can do is go to Select and Inverse, the fourth one down. Shift, Control, and I if you want to use the key command. Select and Inverse. This selects the opposite of what I've got. So if I click that now, my marching ants are going to be around the edge of the page and to the edge of the starship. So that means I can press delete and I delete everything apart from the starship. So the inverse button selects the opposite of what you've got selected at any given time. Press Ctrl D to deselect, and now I can make my spaceship a little bit smaller, and I can stick him in front of the city. So now I've got my layers all selected in order. If I wanted him to be sticking out behind them, I put him between the space layer and the city layer. He's in between them. He's the second layer, and I can move him about however I want him and place him wherever I want him to be. While you're working on things like this, you're more than likely going to be using other tools as well. So if I was to use, for example, the brush tool here, so this little paintbrush tool, I say I wanted to paint something into the picture. I'm just going to use some red paint for the example. And I was painting, I wanted to have some red lines or whatever somewhere in my picture. The problem I've done here is I've painted that straight onto the city layer. As you can see here on this layer, there's red lines very small on there. So if I try and move my red lines, I'm moving the city as well. I'm going to undo this because I don't want any silly red lines on there. I want to have some red lines on a separate layer. So if you're making a new layer, you go down to the bottom of the layer tab and there is something, there's a little plus in a box. This makes a brand new layer. You can press it as many times as you want, depending on how many layers you want. Just press Ctrl Z to get rid of them, or you can drag them down to the bin and get rid of them. So now I've got a new layer, but at the moment it's blank. There's nothing on it. I've just made a blank layer. I could paint on top of that layer, like that. Just a random sort of red shape. I've painted on the layer, but at the moment, because it's the top layer, it's on top of everything. I don't really want that. I'm going to move it down so that it's behind the city, but it's still on top of my spaceship layer. Again, I can move that down again. I've put it behind the spaceship, and now the spaceship looks as if it's got a little bit of a red glow behind it. I've selected the right layer, make sure on the right layer, and I can just paint a little bit more to make it glow a little bit more if I wanted to. like that. Always make sure you're in the right layer. If I was to try and add more red to this now, and I accidentally selected the top layer again, it's going to paint over the top. Make sure you've got your layers in the correct order at all times and that you have selected the right one at any given time.